The Biden administration had announced that it's planning on lifting Title 42. That was the Trump-era pandemic-related order that prevented asylum seekers and migrants from crossing the US border. And now it turns out that some corporate Democrats who are seeking re-election don't like that because it might actually hurt their chances of getting reelected. And so we don't know what the Biden administration will end up doing, but there is legislation on the table to extend Title 42. And that legislation is authored by Democrats. Now, the Trump-era public health order was put in place in early 2020 and prevented migrants and asylum seekers from crossing the border into the United States due to the COVID-19 pandemic. On April 1st, the CDC said the measure was no longer necessary from a public health standpoint. In fact, they announced that it should be lifted, and the Biden administration did in fact announce that they planned on lifting it. Now, centrist Democrats let's say corporate conservative Democrats like Chris Coons and Senator Gary Peters, who are often vocal supporters of Biden's agenda, are expressing reservations about lifting the policy. In fact, Chris Coons shared those reservations during an interview with Face the Nation recently. Let's hear what he had to say.
The announcement that Title 42, which is a public health measure, may be rolled back in a number of weeks. That's something where the CDC declared that they could no longer justify this ongoing practice of expelling folks who come to our border based on the pandemic. In the region where I'm from, we're seeing infections rise. I think Philadelphia, for example, just returned to a mask mandate. So my hope is that that will be reconsidered appropriately. I know that there are both Republicans and Democrats calling for a reconsideration, and the administration just announced a plan for how to deal with a possible surge in crossings at the border. Margaret, we do need to come together and show our values that we can secure our border and improve the inhumane immigration system, that so many of us have worked to try and address for years.
All right, and of course, Senator Gary Peters also weighed in saying, unless we have a well thought out plan, I think it is something that should be revisited and perhaps delayed. I'm going to defer judgment on that until I give the administration the opportunity to fully articulate what that plan is. But Biden did put out a plan, and that plan was pretty detailed. We talked about it here on the show, where he would empower more than just immigration judges to process people as they're seeking asylum. And look, at the end of the day, what's informing the statements that you're hearing from these conservative Democrats is fear, worries that they won't get reelected, and the fact that, look, let's keep it real, like Republicans, unfortunately, have been successful in their anti-immigrant propaganda. They have convinced Americans that migrants are dangerous, asylum seekers should not be admitted into the country, and it's reflected in polling. For instance, a recent poll from Morning Consult shows that a majority of Americans, 56% to be specific, oppose lifting the measure, while support and opposition break down predictably by party lines. Just 31% of independent voters support Biden lifting Title 42. So that is what is informing their decision. But I mean, what Democrats are trying to do right now is essentially extend Title 42 for another 60 days. I don't really see how kicking the can down the road is gonna help them in any way. What their failure has been is the inability to do effective messaging to counter the propaganda coming from right wingers who campaign on fear. That's all they've got, that's all they do.
Yeah, I think the most important part of the story, unfortunately, is the Biden video, which we're going to get to in a second. That's not just about this, so it gets to a larger issue. But on this issue, of course, the conservative Democrats are going to go and be anti-immigration. But Chris Coons saying, oh, it's because of the pandemic, my ass it is. That has nothing to do with any of this. By the way, guys, look, you have to actually listen to the science. At this point, if you're vaccinated, the mortality rate of COVID is less than 0.1%. And he's worried that in Delaware, they're gonna get more COVID because people are crossing the border down in Mexico to Texas and Arizona. No, he's not worried about that at all. That's a classic politician lie. It's not, it has nothing to do with COVID. He just wants to scare Democratic voters. Okay, so Chris Coons is one of the most conservative Democrats. You shouldn't trust a word that comes out of his mouth. And so if he's saying it, by the way, that means Biden's about to backpedal. Again, he is the top ally for Biden in the Senate. If he's criticizing Biden, there's very, very little chance he didn't get permission ahead of time from Biden, so that Biden can go, well, I mean, there's pressure, and what can I do, and maybe I could change on Title 42, because you know what, being more like the Republicans has worked out so great for Biden's polling so far. Oops, that strategy hasn't worked at all, but as always, they've learned nothing from it.
Yeah, so now it's pretty unclear what the future holds for Title 42. I think the Biden administration has really engaged in this culture of kicking the can down the road on a number of different issues, including student loan debt. So instead of just forgiving student loan debt, he keeps extending I don't know what the exact word is.
Moratorium.
Moratorium, exactly. The moratorium on students having to pay their federal loans, and he's citing the pandemic as a reason for that. But eventually, I mean, you're gonna have to deal with it, and kicking the can down the road closer and closer to elections, whether it be the midterm or eventually the presidential election, makes no sense. It really doesn't.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.